Hello, welcome back to Search Sean. This is another Chat with Sean episode. And as usual, I'll get the housekeeping out of the way. Then we've gone to my awesome guest today. Yeah, lots going on as usual. I've just posted a very long SEO, AI, digital marketing news episode. It's going down well. I try and incorporate all the videos and social posts and stuff like that, make it quite interactive because obviously I know my voice can get quite boring after a while, so I try and incorporate these different things into it. So, definitely go and check that one out. I'll put a link in the description. And also, excitingly, I've got a few co-hosts that you'll probably know joining me on a weekly basis going forward to cover some of the latest news, but not just the usual algorithm updates. We're going to have videos on there, social posts, covering some of those people that you should be following. Just unique stories, I guess, that we find interesting in the news during that week, or talks or case studies or whatever it may be. So definitely stay tuned for that one. I've also had some great people on. So I had Azim Ahmad on recently, was on the main stage of Brighton SEO recently. And it is great. It's talking about Reflect Digital's Search Pulse report that they're doing, and we just went into depth about the Q3 results, and that was interesting. I've also had Ben Steele on. Again, we're talking about content optimizations. It's really interesting, and I actually called him like an OG of SEO when he was old, because when I first got into it, he was like one of the people that I was really I saw a lot of and read a lot of his stuff, and Tom actually fits that bill as well. So that's it's cool to have both of them on at this stage as well. And then Jerry, just to finish off, I've tried to push this. It's still only early days, but we have a WhatsApp channel. So you type in Search with Sean on the channel section. It's all free, obviously. And you just get channel updates and stuff like before anyone else. And obviously, as things grow, I'll try and incorporate more things into it. But it's just another way to kind of stay up to date with everything going on the channel and elsewhere, in digital marketing. So, yeah, I'll stop banging on. I'll go to my great guest today, and it probably needs no introduction. And if you've just been to Brighton SEO, you probably would have seen him. But we have Tom Capper, who is a senior search scientist at Moz. And recently, as I say, did a talk at Brighton SEO on measuring AIO impact. And yeah, thanks for joining me today, Tom. And yeah, as I said to you personally, I really enjoyed the talk. So it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You're making me feel old calling me like an OG or something. I feel like I arrived in the industry fairly late, I guess. I think I started out in 2012. So definitely a good generation or two that went ahead of me. Also, just to double down on what you said, I was chatting to Azim backstage at Brighton as well, and yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, I understand. And yeah, you're not old by any means, but I think I was focused on paid a lot in my early career. And then I switched to kind of more SEO focus, and then like you were one of the people that I was reading from and learning from. So yeah, definitely not old by any means. I guess, when I first read about yourself, and we discussed this a bit when we met at a networking event, but I was really interested by your role, senior search scientist. Can you just explain kind of what that incorporates and the kind of things you look at?
It's a bit of a strange job title, right? And I mean, I think, so I work for Moz and Stat, and Moz has a bit of a history of strange job titles, I think it would be fair to say. So that explains some of it. Yeah, when I started at Moz, it was my first job. I've been at Moz, nearly 5 years now. It was my first job outside of consulting. So I've been running London consulting for Distilled previously, and I'd also been doing some freelance consulting. It was my first job sort of either in-house or at a software company, or kind of both. But it's a pretty broad remit, which is actually what I like most about the role. I pretty much can pick and choose what I think I should be working on. But my job is essentially the underlying role is to connect Moz to the industry a bit, because obviously most of our engineers, most of our marketers even, sometimes, representatives of our parent company, this kind of thing, they're not from an SEO background, because that would be weird, right? It'd be weird if we filled a whole company with people from an SEO background. So my job is to give them the sort of context and depth to allow them to make good decisions about products in those areas, whilst also working with them and being familiar with Moz and being familiar with Moz's tech stack and this kind of thing. So I'd say a lot of my role is sort of product innovation and product direction and working on our data and metrics to make sure that they're sort of robust and meaningful. And then I also do a smaller part of my role is stuff like we're doing right now, or like I was doing last week at Brighton, which is sort of publicly representing the company in the industry.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, you do a great job. And Moz does put out some really great content on their own, the whiteboard stuff and all that kind of thing is really cool. So enjoy them. And in terms of obviously we are going to focus on AI overviews, but things have moved on so much, as you say, that was kind of like a slightly older presentation, but I guess obviously they're still prevalent in the results and there's, but things have moved on. So we'll kind of adapt it a bit, but those questions were focused towards that. But so what you see, what's the real story behind the AI overviews, traffic impact? Obviously, there's some great insights about that, but obviously you can expand that to AI mode as well if you've got anything on that or views on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we were mentioning this last week. It's pretty weird with conferences at the moment. So we've always said, and by we I mean sort of the industry at large, we've always said, SEO is so fast moving, but actually for a long time it kind of wasn't, right? Like the fundamentals and the lay of the land stayed pretty similar for a pretty long time. I guess maybe there was a bit of a shift from a big link emphasis to a big content emphasis, but even that wasn't like a transformative shift. And really the fundamentals were very, very stable for almost the entire time I worked in the industry. And then the last couple of years, okay, now it really is moving quickly. And so it's weird when you pitch, because if you pitch a conference or you talk with a conference organizer about what you want to speak about, they want to get that stuff finalized 6 months, 9 months, sometimes 12 months ahead of time. And then by the time you actually get to the event, it's like, okay, well, so for example, at Brighton, I spoke about measuring IOs, still relevant, right? I'm not saying that what I said was wrong or obsolete or out of date, but it probably wasn't the most topical thing on my mind in that week, right? Like if I think about what I've been thinking about in the last month, we've had like num equals 100. That's been huge for SEO tools. As you say, AI mode has appeared since I pitched that deck. So, a lot happens, but AIOs are still a big deal. Totally. I think people talk a lot about the great decoupling this year. And that is basically a story about AIOs. AIOs, as far as I can see, are 90% of that click decline. And Moz is owned these days by a publishing company. Ziff Davis is our parent company. And so I get to speak a lot with publishers. And yeah, they're all looking at AIOs as being hugely significant. And they don't see it as an existential threat or something. I've seen some people using that kind of language. They don't see it as an existential threat. They can see alternative ways to get traffic and to make their business work. But it is certainly a huge sort of sea change. And yeah, it's been interesting over the last, and it is basically we're recording in October, so it's kind of the last 6 months that this is really ramped up. Obviously, we had AIOs before that, but the prevalence has gone up by such a large amount in the last 6 months, I think particularly around sort of Q2 and Q3 this year. That said, in the last couple of months, we've noticed a little bit of a withdrawal, maybe. I think particularly for informational SERPs, which is the sort of top of funnel for search, that AIOs have relaxed a little bit. They may be slightly, and we're talking about single-digit percentage, slightly less common than they were in the summer. And we're also seeing an increasing trend, and this is especially true in Search Labs, which is the beta experience, seeing an increasing trend of AIOs that aren't in position 1, which obviously changes the calculus a little bit if you've got an AIO appearing beneath potentially multiple organic results. So yeah, that's kind of one to look out for.
Yeah, I think Mark Williams-Cook has recently reported about them being found in people also ask, and I've seen summaries on YouTube as well and things like that. They're trying to test out, and
yeah, there's a whole other thing there as well with like So when I talk about AIOs appearing further down, I'm still talking about pure AIOs, but you're also absolutely right, and Mark is right, that AIOs are also appearing nested in all kinds of other features in Google products now. They're becoming sort of, what's the phrase, endemic in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think it's quite a wide, open question as well, because impact can mean so many things. So it could mean obviously traffic impact, brand visibility impact, and also in my sector that I work in, like health, potentially an impact to misinformation, around certain areas, which is obviously there's been some famous examples of that. So I guess what's really interesting has been a little dance between AI overviews and SERP features in the data that especially I watch, looking at, and I think other people reported in the industry. How do you separate like AI overview impact versus from like the broader zero click sort of trend that we were seeing before that even the sort of came in?
I think it is a continuation of the same. Looking at an industry trend level, it isn't a continuation of the same. And by the way, I totally agree with what you're saying about misinformation. Like health has been one of the most affected areas in terms of AIOs are very common for health SERPs, and that is surprising to me. That's almost confounding to me almost that Google would make that decision. In terms of separating whether your traffic loss is being driven by AIOs or just the general march of knowledge graph and feature snippets and other zero-click features, obviously the first place I would look is, and I'm biased, I'm commercially incentivized to say this, the first place I would look is rank tracking data. Because in your rank tracking data, you should be able to see what keywords had AIOs on what days. And from when, probably, because they don't tend to come and go with much regularity. It tends to be they come and then they stay. So I would look at that and obviously then match that up to your Search Console data, your analytics data if you can. It's a little bit difficult to match up with analytics data because obviously, as has been the case for more than a decade now, analytics data it's not keyword level. But there are, this is one of the things I was talking about at Brighton, it is possible to pull fragments using Tag Manager or using a Tag Manager. It is possible to pull fragments. You sometimes see at the end of a link in a feature snippet or in an AI overview, there's a sort of long hash parameter. You can extract that and then send that into analytics and then comparing that with your rank tracking data, you could do some triangulating and say, oh, I actually know that this traffic in my analytics came from this keyword, which is interesting because that's data that we didn't have before the AIOs have given us. The trouble is it's not super reliable data because AIO links are not always marked up in this way. And you can have a situation where the same hash parameter might be used on multiple keywords. So if you're not tracking one of the keywords that has it, that can be difficult to isolate. So this gets messy fast, is basically what I'm saying. But there are some ways that you can start to chip away at this problem and understand, you can do a little bit of deduction and understand which keywords you're still getting traffic from, or it's actually easier to figure out which keywords you're not still getting traffic from, which is in some ways equally useful.
Yeah, that was interesting. Actually, I put out on my homework to look into that when I was watching your talk about that parameter thing, and so that was I was fun. Have you released your sites for Brighton yet, or you're going to do soon?
I think Brighton themselves will circulate them, but I also have they're also on a URL on the stats site, so I can share that with you afterwards, and you can put that in the description of the episode.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be really useful. And I guess kind of a bit off the beaten track here, but kind of like, say you are being picked up a lot in AI, or like your competitors are, like the terms that you want to be seen for, they're being picked up in AI overviews and SERP features. Like, how aggressive should you go towards optimizing for that versus just creating like the usual good content that you should like create, if you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like should you be chasing them, or would they just come naturally if you do the right things, you reckon?
I think there's sort of two answers to that question. One is that to some degree, as you alluded to, they might be the same thing. We see a huge overlap between the AIO top 3, the 3 featured, there's lots of these like small links in AIOs, but the 3 ones that you might actually click on, right? There's a big overlap between the AIO top 3 and even the organic top 3. That's already can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say like a 60-something% overlap. But then if you expand that to the organic top 10, it's like a 90-something% overlap. So really targeting organic is going to get you, if you're doing organic well, and a lot of this goes for, I hate the acronym, but it seems to be the one we settled on. A lot of this goes for geo as well. If, people are saying, oh, you need to chunk it up and make sure you're directly answering questions and, use clear language in this. All of this stuff was good SEO already, right? And I'm not saying there's nothing you would do specifically for geo, because that's not true. But if you do everything that you should have been doing for SEO, then I think for AI overviews especially, you're already going to be in a good place. There's only one domain which we see in AIOs significantly more than we see in the organic top 3 in our entire corpus. And that domain is YouTube. So what applies to YouTube probably does not apply to you. So you don't need to worry about that, right? Unless you're planning to be bought by Google, in which case, all credit to you, but you don't need advice from me. So I think you're probably not going to have dedicated tactics just for AIOs. That said, there is a broader question of, you say making content like you always did. Do you want to make content like you always did? Like if that's no longer going to drive a click, and you need to figure out for yourself whether in your case that is going to drive a click or not. This does vary from site to site and from keyword to keyword. But if you're making content like you always did, and you're only getting an impression out of it, that might be okay, right? Marketing for impressions is a thing. The company you work for probably spends a fortune on billboard advertising. That for sure does not drive a click. But whatever calculus you had before, whatever ROI you were thinking about when you wrote content to get to click, that ROI is lower now. So unless it was an absolute slam dunk before, you probably do want to reevaluate. And what a lot of people are doing is either looking at other channels, sadly, or moving down the funnel, or looking at SEO and geo together as more of a brand marketing channel and saying, okay, the game is about impressions. What would we do differently if this was only about impressions? Because that might actually be the answer, right?
Yeah. And you explained in your talk about 2 paths. There are still people that will click is still going to be their main aim on an objective, and they should still focus there. And then obviously like the visibility path, and like you say, it will vary depending anyway on, like in Macmillan, we're going to have a piece of content that still we're going to want to drive traffic towards. That still be the ultimate goal. But then the others will be okay to like drive that visibility towards. And it's about making sure you're comfortable with that and you're tracking it correctly,
That's exactly what I was going to say as well. I think for a lot of cases, for a lot of businesses, it's going to be both. For Moz.com, for example, it is both, but it's also helpful to think about them a little bit separately. We have parts of the site where the point is clicks. When I think about product pages, for example, we want people to come and inspect the product, look at the pricing page, buy. These are further down the funnel. And then we also have parts of the site, when I think about, our Learn Center pages, even when I think about things like Whiteboard Fridays, those were never converting visits, right? Like it's never been a common path for someone to watch a Whiteboard Friday and then purchase a Moz Pro subscription. And that's okay. The point of those was to get our brand out there, to get people familiar and comfortable with us, so that when they were looking for an SEO tool or for SEO data or wherever it might be, we would be a trusted partner. So it's more of deciding for different parts of your site, for different types of content. Is this for clicks, or is it a brand? Is this about performance marketing, or is it about brand marketing? And if it's about brand marketing, does it still add up in a world where we won't get a click?
Yeah. And I guess for certain features, I guess it's always been for a while that if you're wanted to dominate for a certain topic or query, and there's particular search features that dominate the results, and you should look at if it's worth creating a sort of asset for it or whatever it may be. I guess that's not really changed that much in that world.
I think it's got harsher. But yeah, this, as you alluded to earlier, like the writing has been on the wall for a long time. The way I've sort of talked about this sometimes in the past is as a rising tide. 10 years ago, maybe not even 10 years ago, maybe I mean 15 years ago. 15 years ago, it would be a reasonable SEO traffic gaining strategy that you could sell display ads against to answer just really simple questions in search, right? You could answer questions like, what's the weather today? Or how old is Vin Diesel? Or when does it get dark tonight? Or what is £5 in US dollars? And people would have to click through to your website to answer those questions. For a long time, it's been the case that those kinds of simple questions, they're answered directly in the SERP. Nobody's clicking through to weather.com, right? It's just not a thing. So that's already been there for those simpler questions. But then the complexity of question that is answered in that way has gone up and up and up. And now the complexity of question that is answered directly is quite high. So what this means is just like the bar for, is this worth writing an article for, is going up and up and up. And for what it's worth, I think there's problematic second order questions there. Like, okay, what if Google disincentivizes everyone from writing down what they know? That's a society level problem. But putting that to one side, because a little bit out of scope, I think we just have to get used to the fact that if we're going to bother writing something, if we're going to bother producing content, it needs to be quite sophisticated and interesting, which sounds obvious, but hasn't always been the case, right?
Oh, 100%. That's what Ben was talking about when he came on. Now you're going to have to get creative and interesting, unique. Like if you are going to create a video for an asset, it just has to be something different. Like you can't just create, like, even you take the same principle to YouTube, you could still answer basic queries and do a video on it, and it doesn't have to be like top notch, but it has to cover the subjects. You've got high enough authority to kind of rank, and that won't even like cover it anymore, even on like the video results obviously on Google, but even on YouTube, like with the amount of content out there now, and obviously people are going to create AI stuff over and over. There's going to be a lot of that. I don't know how YouTube are going to deal with that, but yeah, it's going to be interesting. And AI mode, when that comes into play, how much, full effect, obviously we know it's there now, but how much when it goes perhaps being the default, what kind of features they're going to include and how it's going to be laid out, and what are you fighting for in terms of like visibility and being mentioned. And I know they're testing a lot of stuff in beta, which you kind of discussed as well. I don't know what you're seeing on there, because I don't have full visibility on that.
I guess it's worth saying the other, as we're on a podcast, the other angle besides, sophisticated and interesting is, I don't want to say, kind of personal. Like that's the other way that you might stand out and be worthy of someone watching your first party content as opposed to Google's summary of it. And if you look at a lot of media organizations, it's interesting. A few years ago, I was consulting and I was advising people not to paywall, right? Because it didn't seem like a good idea at the time. These days, I was wrong, 100%. If you can get away with a paywall, you should. If you are the Financial Times or the Economist or someone like this, right? You don't care about reviews, because you're giving people, people are coming to you not even because they think that you're going to have a really sophisticated and interesting answer to their sophisticated and interesting question. They're coming to you because of who you are. And if you can put yourself in that kind of position, then you can forget about everything we've just said, right? Which is a nice place to be. But easier said than done. How do you get there? And you probably get there by doing everything we've just said. And you asked about, you mentioned AI mode. Obviously, we don't know. I don't think AI mode will become the default, or at least if it does, I don't think it will look like it does now. To me, AI mode is a ChatGPT competitor. In fact, I'd go further and say it's a ChatGPT killer. It's producing that In the same way that ChatGPT, all the data suggests that ChatGPT hasn't cannibalized search. If anything, it might have led to an increase in Google search volume. And we could get into how robust that data is, but I think the one thing you can take away from it is that the use cases are different. People are using ChatGPT and Google for the most part, not ChatGPT or Google, because they're good at different things. And I think what Google has done very well over the years is brought that kind of thing under one roof. I talked about some of those zero-click features like weather or a currency conversion or whatever before. Google doesn't make money on those features, right? They're not monetized. In fact, they're quite expensive to produce. And Google has, at the scale that Google does, and Google has been doing those for a long time. Why does it do that? Why does it produce informational features that cost money and don't generate revenue? It's because they want to be a one-stop shop, right? They want to keep you in their ecosystem. I've used the analogy in the past. It's like when you go to the supermarket and you buy a joint of meat from the supermarket, even though you know it's worse than the butcher. And the supermarket offers that product, even though the supermarket also knows that it's worse than the butcher, because they want to keep you in-house, right? Because you can't go to the butcher and buy bleach, a toothbrush, and a bag of potatoes. That would be weird. So Google is working on the same principle, right? And it's the same with this. AI mode just needs to be nearly as good at ChatGPT at what ChatGPT does well. And then all of a sudden, you don't have a reason to leave the Google domain or the Google ecosystem. And AI mode it's already on all of your devices. It's already in your browser. It's on the web page you're already visiting, which is google.com. And it's, they've got it all there. And it's what they should have done 2 years ago when they were panicking with SGEs instead. In terms of how it affects traditional search, I do think we'll see some. It's worth saying I've been wrong before, but I do think we'll see some hybridization. So if you look in this, I think this is what you were mentioning. If you look in Search Labs, which is the sort of beta experience for Google search, in Search Labs at the moment they have a feature called I think it's called Web Guides, where it's typically not in position 1. It looks more like an AI mode result than an AI overview. It tends to have a lot of prose, and then it will also have embedded in it some links which look a lot like traditional Google Tembu links. And so this is a kind of hybrid result type that's a little bit search, a little bit AI. Personally, for me, like a lot of these AI written results, I don't actually find it that great as a user. It's excessively verbose. I think this is something that both Google and ChatGPT get wrong a lot, is that I don't want a huge number of words in the answer to every question. That said, as an SEO, I think it's way better, because it's, for lack of a better word, it's a lot clickier than these sort of current generation AI features.
Yeah, I love that tone. You're actually the first person I heard to say they don't think it's going to be the default, because it seems a lot of people think it's inevitable, but it's interesting to hear a different approach on that. So, yeah, interesting.
As I say, I think it's a bit of a use case thing, and there's a lot of things that I use Google for where AI mode is just worse. Plus, Google has a business model, right? They monetize based on outbound clicks. AI mode is it monetized at all right now? It's certainly not well monetized. And in order for that business model to work, their results for commercial queries have to include links to websites, right? Now, you might say, okay, maybe in the future they're going to monetize agentic or something like that. That's a long way off, also really difficult. The fact that we're however many years in, we've invested however many hundreds of billions in GPUs, And monetization is, Google is as close as anyone in that they have monetized AI overviews. Even then, the adoption amongst advertisers is not great. Monetizing this stuff is hard if you're certainly in a search context, precisely because monetization in a search context, has to give something back to the brand. There has to either be a click or a purchase or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think replacing every single SERP with something that looks like AI mode is really difficult. Probably worse for users, probably worse for Google, probably worse for advertisers. For informational search, sure. I could see that kind of split.
Yeah. You made good points. I mean, it's valid arguments, I guess. Before we continue, you're just like really interested to hear your thoughts on a couple of recent things. So obviously, and you're right, Google has all the trust as well. Like they built this trust over years. They built the infrastructure around it. Obviously, OpenAI launching Atlas, like a new form of browser. Thoughts on that, and also thoughts on how these new what you think of this new sponsored results format on Google, because I'm hearing like a lot of people do not like the way that looks. Your thoughts on those? That'd be interesting.
I haven't looked too much at sponsored results, so I will reserve my judgment on that one. I also haven't looked too much at OpenAI's browser, but I think that's a bad idea, surely. Like, I can't see them getting people away from Chrome at scale. And also, as a user, browsers are fighting a constant battle in terms of security, right? Like browser level exploits are very dangerous. And I feel like I read every other day about some kind of security exploit using OpenAI's or Perplexity's browser. This is not an easy thing to do. We've already seen that ChatGPT results, which is their core product, have like massive spam vulnerabilities, and extremely easy to jailbreak as well. So I personally wouldn't feel comfortable typing my credit card details into an OpenAI browser, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I saw a post on LinkedIn about the danger people have spotted, like these sort of dangers that you were saying, especially around Perplexity's Comet browser. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about if you're going to use it. I guess what kind of, obviously we talked about health, but which industries or intent types are most exposed right now in terms of the AI overview side of things?
So yeah, health is definitely one of them. The others that come to mind as having been strongly affected for a long time are sort of science, natural world, this kind of like, I don't have a good word for it, but almost like educational, not as in about education. I'm not Googling schools, but as in this kind of, what do you call it? Like knowledge, where again, you might have expected that Google would want to be careful about some of these topics, maybe not. Also, law and government, I guess, similar. It's like almost academic type. Maybe that's making it sound more advanced, but like, I'm essentially looking for established facts. I'm asking a question that has a clear answer. Whether it be, are dolphins a mammal, or is it illegal to do X, or something like this, right? What I would say though is that everything I've just said was particularly true at the start of this year. And what's happened over the course of this year is basically every vertical that had low prevalence of AI overviews has somewhat caught up. There is really nowhere safe anymore. Like if like many, you instinctively think that safe means no AI overviews. At the start of the year, there were a few verticals you could point to and say, actually, Google's avoiding those. From the top of my mind, I think vehicles and real estate for whatever reason. I guess they're quite commercial leaning, but Google just wasn't going into it. Now you will get overviews for those types of query. So yeah, it's kind of everywhere. And we've also seen that equalization with intents a little bit. Google has moved our overviews down the funnel somewhat. Still not with the kind of prevalence they have at the top of the funnel, but much, 3 or 4 times the prevalence for commercial or transactional queries that they would have had at the start of the year. And similarly, obviously geographically, at the start of the year, in most EU markets, I think in all EU markets actually, there were no overviews at all. And now it's the other way around. Now those are some of the highest prevalence markets, I think with 1 or 2 exceptions. So yeah, what we've kind of seen is this year is the mass rollout just across the board. And I feel like what we're seeing in the last couple of months is some degree of rationalization and tweaking around that, in terms of maybe Google fine-tuning, turning the dial a little bit back where they turned it too far and this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I've seen that in a few different case studies where there was a couple of months ago, I think, where I saw in my own data, spiked really high for AI reviews and it went crashing back down the month after or something. So yeah, they're playing around with it. And definitely a health one is just really interesting because I'm sure, and I really can't find it, but I'm certain at the beginning of when it all kicks off that they stated that they weren't really going to touch the health sector because of the concerns they've got over it.
I don't think they would say, right? But yeah, I mean, I can remember even with the search generative experience, as it was called a couple of years ago, they were like almost instantly when they released that. I think at the time there were a lot of concerns about air quality in New York. It's driven by forest fires or something, and then the smoke had drifted to New York. And almost instantly, there was all of this bad advice around air quality. And it was at sort of the tail end of the COVID laws in a lot of jurisdictions and the COVID vaccine rollout as well. And there was all of this bad advice about that appearing in the SGEs at the time. So yeah, it surprised me, right? Like it's totally the kind of thing where I'd expect Google to say, we even saw it in the Google leak, right, where they have these like whitelisted domains that are allowed to talk about these topics, and then you produce some AI summary that says whatever. Sure.
It seems crazy to me. I don't know. Like some topics you just shouldn't mess around with, in my opinion. Like just do the usual rankings, make the usual like trusted publishers show up so people can go and find it for their.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not yet there with the AI stuff to like proper cut out any misinformation or sort of hallucinations. So
I will say that I feel like I see fewer humorously bad examples of that stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe there is something clever they're doing with AI overviews specifically, where the answer it produces is only drawn from certain sites for certain queries. I could imagine that. But again, I'm speculating wildly. I don't really know.
Yeah, say you are like majorly affected by all these features that are coming out and your traffic is totally like tanked. One thing that did, like I've seen in recent case studies, I use like emojis a lot, which people either hate or love. But I use emojis or whatever. And the main website that maybe people go to for emojis now, it kind of being, if you type it into Google, then they're showing the results on Google, so you can take it directly from Google, the emoji, without having to go on this website. And Ben kind of made a good point, and the more I look at it, the more he has a point, is that when you go on this website that does all these emojis, it used to be very clean and crisp and easy to use to find the emoji and stuff. And now it's full of
nicer to use the Google search results.
Well, yeah, it's that basically. And also like now the website, they kind of got carried away and loads of adverts on their pop-ups that they were trying to take advantage of the traffic, and it was making it a poorer user experience. So
I mean, it's a vicious cycle, right? Because now that they're getting fewer clicks, they're probably going to monetize harder. And the user experience will get even worse.
Mm.
And you'll be even more inclined to use Google. And then it'll all happen again. And then eventually there'll be no website for Google to draw that stuff from. And, you know, I'm dooming a little bit there, but the argument you made is absolutely right. And I've heard Jono Alderson make a similar argument that in a lot of spaces, and I don't mean we as SEOs, but I mean sort of we as webmasters did this to ourselves. You know, we made the user experience of websites so bad that people would rather use an AI summary. And that's even while most people still, well, if you ask them, most people will still say they don't want to read AI content, right? And I don't want to name and shame, but I've seen some examples in the industry recently, right, of people having a very negative reaction to realizing that content that they were reading was AI written. And that's even in our industry where we're probably at the forefront of this. So it's interesting that people have those kinds of views and those kinds of reactions, and yet they would still rather that than click through to the website where they're going to be bombarded with a million pop-ups. We've done that, right? Not you and me personally, although I'm sure we've done our part, but we as an industry and as a broader ecosystem have sort of driven that change. And it's difficult to see how the ecosystem stabilizes in the long run from that. But it's I am sympathetic to the argument that we've dug our own graves a little bit.
Yeah, I've had Jono on recently, actually, and I think what this reminds me of, I try and put it in a different scenario. It's like, you know, like you open up a restaurant and it's really good food, the prices are affordable, you're getting in customers, it's doing really well, you've got great customer service because you actually care, because you're like a new restaurant and things are going well. And you get, you know, bigger and bigger, you open up more seating, you put up prices a bit because, you know, you've got a bit of a name now, and, you know, you're getting reviews in the press and they're good and stuff. But then because you don't want to hire any more staff, you like making a profit. So you just start kind of, you know, and then things start to suffer a bit. The food quality goes down a bit because you haven't got enough chefs in the kitchen. You haven't got enough staff to look after all the people, additional people. And then you think actually things are going still quite well. So I'm going to build more chains across the country, and you start broadening out, and you just like, you get carried away with the success, but you're not still looking after like the actual user experience enough to then keep it successful. And in the end, it will catch up with you. And I think, like I said, we're like websites. We obviously want people to land on the site, and we get really excited and want to monetize it or capitalize on it, which is fair enough. But there's some websites you go on there, so like you say, it's a really horrible experience, and that's why kind of you know, Ben was saying as well, like you just said, like the gated content could be something we see more often, actually. And you know, I know a lot of the publishers are going through the paid route, like you say, but he did state that gated content, like you say, going forward with all this AI slop, as they call it, people are going to want genuinely good content going forward. And that obviously, like the user generated stuff, like we've seen from Reddit and like podcasts like this, but also, yeah, the gate stuff and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a degree to which Google is also digging their own grave, because the more they deliver, create, index, serve slop, the more likely it is that I will bypass Google completely and pay a subscription to, you know, whatever news organization I might prefer. And this is why I say, like, it's very difficult to predict how this ecosystem balances out. I am not a Google doomer by any stretch. I think Google will win. You know, I think they're in a tremendous position with all of this stuff. But what them winning actually looks like in the long term is harder to, you know, there's quite a few different outcomes. It's harder to predict. I think, yeah, I mean, your analogy also reminds me a little bit of OpenAI, right? like I'm sort of, obviously like most software companies, Moz is a OpenAI API customer. We've built all of our products in such a way that we can switch APIs pretty easily if we need to. And I'm waiting for the day when OpenAI just like suddenly 10x's their prices. They have to repay all of that capital expenditure somehow, right? And their current revenue ain't going to do it. So, I think they're in a sort of interesting parallel situation as well.
Yeah, I just, on the news episode, I featured a woman who does a really great series, Vanessa Wingard. I think I probably butchered her surname, but she's really good. And she was talking about that, OpenAI kind of, it's cost them a lot of money. They're not making any money at the moment. They're pumping in a lot of money. They're doing like these circular deals with other sort of providers that are kind of keeping them afloat, but it's all kind of just circulating between them and Nvidia and people like that. And sooner or later, they were going to have to go hard on the advertising or push up those prices. Yeah.
Yes, it's everything that people said about Uber 10 years ago, maybe more than 10 years ago, on steroids, right? Like OpenAI have spent so much more money than Uber to deliver so much less revenue than Uber. And what Uber were able to do was establish a de facto monopoly and then raise prices. I don't think OpenAI can establish a de facto monopoly because they're competing with Google. I saw Tom Critchlow shared this on LinkedIn recently. I'm trying to remember the exact quote. He was also resharing someone else, but it was something like Google is going to drown their competitors in a sea of cogs, as in costs. Like Google can just deliver AI answers more cheaply than OpenAI can. And that will probably always be true. And Google has better monetization, and Google has better scale, and Google has deeper pockets. So it's really hard to see how OpenAI gets itself into that Uber position where they can stabilize and ramp up prices. Because you'd switch to Gemini, wouldn't you? Like, it's basically the same thing except cheaper.
Yeah, and Gemini is picking up a lot of momentum. A lot more people are using Gemini now. It's got a lot better. A lot of people saying, I think it has as well.
Whereas GPT-5 is not such a popular release.
No, they got a lot of backlash. I don't think it's that bad, but people did get quite a lot of bad press.
Of course, I mean, we test these things internally, like both from a tracking perspective, because also we have AI tracking products, but also because we have a lot of features that historically would have been powered by like in-house NLP that these days we try to see if we can augment that with off-the-shelf LLM products. So for example, in keyword suggestions or keyword relatedness or topic clustering, this kind of thing, we have our own historic methods, but we might try and augment them or have multiple methods and see which one works best. So we are evaluating these APIs at scale quite often, and GPT-5 has not gone well.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess to finish off, like if you're seeing some really bad results and your traffic's tanked and you're not getting picked up as much as you used to, what kind of things would you be, like 2 or 3 things would you be working on to try and turn the tables or pick up some sort of more visibility?
$1 million question, right? I think the answer's not going to be the same for everyone. I'm trying to avoid saying it depends, but that was an it depends, wasn't it? But I think if you're in a position where, so like from Moz.com, for example, so Moz is a web publisher that has lost a lot of traffic because of various AI changes and also increased competition. A lot of Moz competitors didn't used to make content and they now do. And at the same time, we are also a website where you can make the final purchase, right? So we have the full funnel, which a lot of publishers don't. For a lot of publishers, they would be featuring ads, which would be for someone else's brand. And so for them, the conversion is the impression. Whereas for us, the conversion is you buy the Moz API or Moz Local or Stats or Moz Pro, whatever it might be. So for us, or for businesses like us, what we're looking at is moving our content down funnel a little bit and maybe caring about impressions at the top of the funnel, revenue at the bottom of the funnel, not stressing clicks in the middle. Not everyone is in a position to do this, right? This is going to vary depending on the kind of business that you work in. And frankly, also on like what your boss has decided to KPI you on and whether you could change their mind about that. But let's be realistic, that is going to be a thing. For other kinds of business, if you are a publisher, so many of our sister companies are publishers that have previously monetized on display ads. They all have their own plans for how they want to deal with this. I'm not too, I would say I'm quite optimistic about the ones that I've heard. Like they sound pretty sensible and they're doing well so far. But again, it's not necessarily about getting top of funnel clicks from Google. It's about like, okay, what are other channels where we can still monetize in that way? Like, for example, YouTube or email, or it might be, what are the new opportunities here? So, for example, if I'm a brand and I want to be featured more in AI answers, one of the things that I probably need to prioritize more than I have done historically is getting mentioned in third-party content, right? That's, off-site SEO is back in a big way. One of the ways that I might address that is native content. Who am I going to talk about native content? Publishers. So there's this sort of new, it's not a new stream, but it's definitely a bigger opportunity than it has been historically. And the fact that it doesn't come with demanding a link kind of sweetens that for both parties, honestly, because that was always awkward. Or it might be, we're going to have even as a publisher, we're going to try and move down the funnel and allow people to directly, we're basically going to become an e-com site as well as a publisher. So you can be able to, purchase something directly from the article or something like that, right? And there's all sorts of different ways that you might approach this, but you just need to evaluate it in terms of what makes sense for your business. And yeah, I would say it's a cliche, but leave traffic as a metric at the door a little bit. Don't get me wrong. It's a useful metric. It's a means to an end. It correlates with a lot of good things, but it's probably not actually what you're monetized against. And if it is what you're monetized against, that might be something you need to evaluate.
Yeah, great stuff. And I agree. I think, education internally is going to be a huge thing. If it hasn't, it's always been, but definitely educating people about the changes in search and why these KPIs or whatever need to kind of change, or metrics you follow need to kind of be adapted.
I feel like as SEOs, we're always trying to de-educate the things that we taught people 10 years ago. So like 10 years ago, I would have taught a marketing manager something in my capacity as an SEO consultant. I would have taught a marketing manager something. That marketing manager is now a CMO and still has that memory of what I told them 10 years ago, which is now wrong. And we're just sort of constantly fighting this battle again and again and again and again.
Yeah, that's why Garrett Sussman, who was on, was kind of saying we might have to change the whole, what we're even called anymore as SEOs. But yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, I agree. Look at different channels like YouTube, like still this like second biggest search engine. It's a huge opportunity.
YouTube's huge. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. There's loads of opportunities out there, not just the usual, search results. So yeah, thanks, Tom. It's been awesome. It's been really good catching up and getting your insights and all that. So yeah, thank you.
See you around.